this is an issue of national importance. It's as important as any issue that I work on. It's an issue that goes to the very heart of why I ran for president. Because if America stands for anything, it stands for the idea of opportunity for everybody. The notion that no matter who you are or where you came from or the circumstances into which you are born, if you work hard, if you take responsibility, then you can make it in this country.
All you have to do is watch any of the shots from various border points and demonstrations. You'll find what appear to be average Americans angry that their needs are not being cared for, and instead their government seems more concerned with the welfare of those coming to the country illegally. Our next guest says there is one certain segment of the population disproportionately affected, and that should be the president's first and foremost concern. Welcome into MidPoint. Founder of the Black American Leadership Alliance, Leah Durant, joins us today. Leah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I want to get to your first statement here where you said the average Americans feel like they are left behind and not adequately represented in the amnesty debate. Would you expand on that, please?
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing is an absolute disconnect on the part of political elites, the financial elites that have decided that they have an agenda, which is to bring as many people into this country as possible. Right now we're seeing so many people that are hurting, struggling to feed their families. And a lot of people are outraged. They're looking at the way that the Obama administration is handling this debacle, and they're frustrated that their needs are not being taken, that their needs are not being cared for. Meanwhile, we're spending millions and oftentimes billions of dollars sending money to Central and South America to quell disturbances, to quell gang violence, but we're not doing anything to care for the needs of U.S. citizens that were born right here in this country.
As part of the Black American Leadership Alliance, are you not specifically also focusing on African American kids and African American communities and jobs in that community as well?
Well, absolutely. We care about jobs for all Americans. We care about jobs for all low-skilled workers. But when you look at the fact that right now black unemployment is double that of whites, you talk about, the administration talks about a humanitarian crisis down the border. We absolutely have a humanitarian crisis right here in cities like South Compton, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and all over this country. So I think if you're going to talk about, putting Americans back to work, we've got to look at the policies that we have that are forcing Americans out of jobs every day. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing take place right in our home countries here in the United States.
Is it fair to say then that there are African Americans who feel as if they are still betrayed by this president?
Absolutely. I think you see it all over. There was a wonderful piece that came out just last week where people from Chicago were outraged. I think you're seeing that people are frustrated with the mismanagement of what's taking place down on the border. I have to say, I've been down on the border myself. I've been down to the West Texas border as well as to Arizona. And you see just absolute haphazard mismanagement. People are frustrated that they have not seen this president take it seriously enough to actually go down to the border and address these issues himself. And people are upset about the joblessness and the poverty that we're seeing in our own country. And really, they're not feeling like this administration is doing anything to alleviate any of that. There's a lot of hurting, a lot of poverty, and people see the administration with huge government outlays for illegal aliens, and they really just want the government to step up and do their job and make sure that Americans are taken care of first.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because as you talk about the Obama administration certainly not doing things, I know a number of the cities that you're concerned about are the same ones that we hear in the news every day. The massive unemployment, the crime that is rife in Chicago and Detroit, places like that. Is that not part and parcel a problem with the local government that has to deal with things? And if there are questions to be had, and if there are people who are not doing their job and money being misspent, does that not also reach down into the fact that certainly in some of these cities, it's seen that they've got governments there that aren't exactly honest at all times to begin with as well?
Right. No, I completely agree with that. But I do think that the local governments take their signal and their cues on how to handle these issues from the federal government. And when you look at an issue like immigration, the Supreme Courts have established that immigration is an issue that the federal government has to deal with. Now, you look at a lot of these communities, they're competing for jobs, for these very same jobs that people.
Okay, I think we've had some technical difficulty there. Hold on one second because the Skype froze. We're going to try and get Leah Durant back here in just a couple of moments here. Let me bring you up to speed then, quite frankly, on what she had said. This was said over the weekend again, saying that the average Americans feel like they are left behind and not adequately represented in the amnesty debate. talking about disaffected voters who are fed up with political elites and both parties overwhelmingly against amnesty, while their leaders are on a completely different page. I want to focus on that, Leah. I understand you're back with me again here. Both parties overwhelmingly against amnesty. It would seem to many people that the Democratic side is not against amnesty. That's what they want.
Well, I guess my point is that everyday Americans, whether they hail from the right or left, they're frustrated by this issue. They see it in their communities. They understand it. They see that it impacts their abilities to get jobs. It prevents them from finding the work that they need to find, and it depresses their wages when they do. So I think that the average everyday working class American understands this issue better than anyone. The problem is that you're seeing the political elites in Washington and those who stand to benefit really just deciding that it's to their gain to allow as many people into the country with complete disregard for how it impacts low-skilled workers. So that's our main concern.
Is it fair to say, because we are told, and again, that the popular idea out there is that many African Americans are still fans of the president, that they are still on the president's side, that they believe he has their best interests at heart here. Are you telling us, and would you believe, in your opinion, that that is a media fabrication? Is that something that is overstated?
I do think it's overstated. And I think finally you're starting to hear voices in the Black community. You're starting to sense this level of outrage by people as they see their communities, they see the poverty-stricken areas in their communities, they see the unemployment, they see that we've got nearly 40 million Americans that are on food stamps. I mean, these are real issues, and these are real issues that are impacting these communities. And they understand that it's a lack of leadership on the part of this administration, which is why we're experiencing a lot of these things, especially with regard to immigration. So again, I do think that's a media fabrication. I think we'll start to see more outrage that we've seen just this past week on the part of Black people in the Black community.
Why do we not then hear more African American lawmakers speaking out, even the Democrats who are sitting there? Because if there is this problem, and it is among their constituents, and the constituency are the ones that are upset about how they are being treated, why don't we hear it from them?
I think you see many of them towing the political line. Unfortunately, I think it's the same thing that we see on the part of many leaders that are not in the African American community. These are people that stand to benefit from this president's policy of opening the borders and allowing as many people in as possible. Fortunately for us, we feel like we do have the American people on our side. And when you look at the polling on this issue, I've got to say time and time again, it shows that the American people want a couple of things. They want the administration, whether it's a president that's a Republican or a Democrat, they want them to stand up and enforce the laws and make sure that immigration laws work for the American public. And I think that's the problem. That's what we're not seeing here. So again, I think average everyday Americans understand this issue. They would like to see our immigration laws enforced. And really, I think people are tired of seeing our immigration laws be made a mockery of. And that really is what we're talking about here when you talk about what's going on down on the Texas border.
Okay, so your group, Bala, and many others are the ones who are saying, we need change, we need something done. All right, I'm going to give you an opportunity right now, a couple of minutes we have left, because there are always those asking, what are the answers? All right, from your perspective then, what are the answers? What needs to be done right now?
Absolutely. I think we need to mandate E-Verify to make sure that the jobs that we have in the country remain in the country. Those jobs in the hotel industry, restaurant industry, construction, we need to make sure that these are going to hardworking Americans who need these jobs to raise their families and support their families. We'd like to see more enforcement opportunities for local law officials. We've had wonderful programs like the 287G program. We need to make sure that the federal government is working in concert with our local law enforcement. These are just a couple of steps that could be taken to make sure that our immigration laws are enforced and that more jobs that are here in the country go to those citizens who deserve them.
I think you may have frozen. No, you didn't. Okay, one thing I do want to ask you about, please, if you won't mind, I'm going to ask you about a controversial issue here I'd like you to respond to, because it certainly is out there in the news. There are those who report that your organization is a front group for an organization called FAIR, which has been trying for years to drive a wedge between African Americans and Latinos. Would you please respond to that?
Absolutely. We're not connected to FAIR. We're not funded by FAIR. We weren't started by FAIR. And that's not to say that I don't disagree with their work. I think they do good work. We are an organization basically that looks out for the average American worker, regardless of their ethnic background. So we have a specific focus on low-skilled African American workers because there's such a problem in the African American community with poverty and unemployment. So again, I think you're hearing some of these same arguments that the Open Borders crowd tries to put out there. But the bottom line is we support the interests of the average everyday Americans. And, that's basically where we stand on this issue.
20 seconds left. Would you say that African Americans need to be, as well as every individual when it comes down to casting a vote in America, to be better educated about whom they vote for and why?
Absolutely. I think, unfortunately, in the Black community, you've seen a lot of people that were so happy to have an African American president, the first African American president, and that is an historic event. It speaks a lot to where we are in the country, but we also have to be aware of policies and where our candidates stand. And I think the immigration issue is the most telling issue, and I think we need to be watching out to make sure that these policies support the communities rather than harm them.
Leah Durant, Black American Leadership Alliance, we thank you so much for joining us. We will do it again.
Thank you.
All right, later on this hour, what's the truth regarding the possible health risk of illegals crossing the American southwest border? We hear stories every day, we hear reports, we see headlines on websites that talk about diseases like Ebola coming into the United States. We'll bring some truth to this and a whole lot more when MidPoint continues.